Welcome to Orange Weekly, presented by Krause Health. 6 feet away from Nate Mink, I'm Brent. Coming up, Syracuse and Liberty. And the Orange are underdogs at home to its one non-conference opponent of the season. How can the Orange fix things on defense? And we'll hear from Syracuse head coach Dino Babers during Syracuse Soundbites. Nate, there's a lot to get into off of Syracuse's loss to Duke a week ago, 38-24. Most notably on the defensive side of the ball, Duke didn't do anything razzle-dazzle. They didn't reach into their bag of tricks. They just ran right down Syracuse's throat to the tune of 363 yards. A little bit of a problem has sprung up here in Tony White's 3-3-5 approach.
Highest rushing total in David Cutcliffe's tenure at Duke, and he's the dean of the ACC going back to 2007. So for whatever reason, Syracuse's defense, whether it was back when Brian Ward was the coordinator or now with Tony White, they seem to surrender some historical achievements to the opponent more often than they would like. But Brent, I really think it really boils down to two things from what we saw. Number one, attrition and injury. And number two is, they played a lot of plays. Like Duke ran 102 plays on Saturday, which is just an astronomical amount. So when your defense is playing 102 plays, you're going to get worn down. And then when you're playing, a bunch of freshmen and redshirt freshmen back there, they're not as physically mature as you'd like your defense to be. They were down Eric Coley, they were out Andre Sisco, some linebackers were in and out of the lineup. It's hard to hold up, and Duke, it was just staring them right in the face. We're just going to run the same play down their throat and dare you to stop us.
The old take what the defense gives you, and from they got that going for them, which is nice category. Syracuse leads the country in takeaways at this point. They've shown this ball hawk mentality in the 3-3-5, so you would think that's going to keep them in a number of games. But even in that Duke game, Nate, 4 takeaways. That should be enough to overcome. 10 minutes to go. They're down 30-24, so that's keeping Syracuse in games. But if opponents continue to run the ball with the success that Duke has, even Georgia Tech in a win ran the ball well. North Carolina earlier this year, there's a pattern emerging. And you said the injuries, Nate. That's the story of this team right now on both sides of the ball. Your starting quarterback's gone for the season. Andre Sisco, we knew, had a serious injury, but made it official this week that he's off to the NFL. All told, 13 players that were on the 2 deep or expected to contribute in some way are banged up coming into this Liberty game. Syracuse, I can't remember a team this hurt at this early point of the season.
Right, we're only 4 games in, Brent. I looked at the spring depth chart that they put out all the way back in the beginning of March, before COVID, before opt-outs, before all this new world we're in here. 14 of those guys that were on the 2 deep are either injured or just left the program for one reason or the other. It hasn't gotten better. Their starters are hurt, their backups are hurt, their offensive line, more than anything, is decimated. They dressed 8 scholarship offensive linemen on Saturday. That includes 3 true freshmen that are supposed to be in the weight room all season, and that includes the converted fullback, Chris Elmore.
Wow. So
you're playing with the deck stacked against you, and it's one of those years. It's when your preseason All-American safety collides with a teammate before a game and is knocked out for the season. It's not your year.
Dino Babers, in 39 years in coaching, said he's never heard of something like that. And that kind of brings to mind, Nate, what this season becomes. It's a weird year. 2020 is weird in many ways, but there's no win minimum to go to a bowl game. This team could win 2 games and end up in the Pinstripe Bowl, for example, right? So there's still something to play for, but really, it's inevitable that 2020 is going to start to become about 2021. When does a Dylan Markowitz or a Jacobian Morgan come in, one of the younger quarterbacks? Younger players have been on the field, as you mentioned, but when do you start saying 2020 is a wash and this is all about the future?
Brent, I think they got to get their numbers up. I mean, respectfully, they can't do much in practice with this kind of a roster decimated. They don't even have a 2 deep on their offensive line. They can't even go 2 or 3 deep at certain positions on their team. So not only does it impact the on-field performance this year, it affects how you practice over the next couple months, and it affects the depth and that underbelly that you can build up. I mean, it really is. You gotta lick your wounds. You gotta get your guys in the rehab room. You gotta get them healed up. And then in the offseason, when you have your full roster back, when you have a new batch of incoming recruits back, when you kind of take stock of which seniors you might have back next year that are able to come back due to the NCAA eligibility rules this year, that's when you're going to have a real firm grasp at really what you have for 2021. Now, that said, it doesn't hurt, again, because of some of these eligibility rules that are in place this year, to play a true freshman quarterback or to continue to play the sheer number of freshmen and redshirt freshmen that they have played this year, because you do have to get that underbelly ready if you want to have the kind of season you're all looking forward to having here. I mean, you're not going to be able to win many games in the ACC when you're under 60 scholarship players, which is the exact situation they're in now. I mean, you have to have numbers on your roster. It affects how you practice, it affects how you play. And until those numbers are there, it's just hard to really accomplish things, not only in the short term, but in the long term as well.
Speaking of numbers, Liberty's a 3-point favorite over Syracuse coming in. We'll talk about the Flames shortly, but first, let's hear from Syracuse head coach Dino Babers in Syracuse Soundbites.
Well, I actually think they're better. They've got a transfer back from Auburn as their quarterback now. Very, very talented athlete, strong arm, very explosive legs. They use him in the run game, kind of similar to the guy at Georgia Tech and Louisville who we played last year. So they're going to be able to run a lot of +1 runs with the quarterback, put him on the perimeter. He's a guy that can take off on scrambles, and he could house call it on those type of things. They have a tailback that's really good, runs behind his pads extremely well, and then they have an explosive receiver. So between those three individuals on offense, they're extremely explosive. Their linebackers are really good on the defensive side of the ball. Their back end is good. Their secondary is athletic, more athletic than you'd normally find at a school like that, and they're going to be very comparable to our wide receivers. And they have a very dynamic pass rusher coming off the edge. Actually, they have two, a number 10 and a number 11. Both of them are really good. But they're a complete football team, and they're very athletic.
Nate, Liberty comes in the one non-conference game of the season for the Orange. They're 4-0 here in 2020. They've got a 6-game winning streak dating back to a season ago. 27 of their 40 points last week in a win over Louisiana Monroe came on special teams, an incredible number. Don't expect that to repeat this week at the Dome, but this Liberty team's got some talent.
They do, Brent. I look at the quarterback position. Malik Willis is a transfer from Auburn. Their backup, who might play. Chris Ferguson, he's a transfer from Maine, who was one of the better players at the FCS level. They have a transfer from NC State on the defensive side of the ball at the rover position. And running back, Josh Mack, he came over a couple years ago from Maine, but he's one of the top rushers in terms of career yardage as anyone in the country. He's behind Travis Etienne at Clemson, who everyone knows, and Spencer Brown at Alabama Birmingham. So Mack, a lot of production, albeit came at that lower level of Division I, but he's a tough little runner. And Liberty, they're going to come in here believing they can win, and that's such an important distinction, I think, to note for a team that ordinarily doesn't have the talent or the depth that a team like SU does. But that's the thing, as we mentioned in the last segment, is that playing field is more even this week than it was a year ago. I think if you go back and watch the tape, SU really wore down Liberty in the second and fourth quarter with their run game. I don't know if they're going to be able to do that this week.
Liberty's averaging 250 yards per game on the ground. That's 7th in the country. Willis, as a quarterback, is the 16th leading rusher in the country. And you mentioned Mack from nearby Pittsford. He's the 12th leading rusher in the country right now. So, Nate, you mentioned it. Liberty doesn't even have a full contingent of FBS football players quite yet. They're getting there, but the rosters are as even as we've seen in this series. I do think Syracuse is going to win this game, though. I think they gut one out. Even with the depleted roster with Rex Culpepper a quarterback, I'm going to say Syracuse wins 27-21.
I'm with you, Brent. I think Syracuse wins 31-28. I think at the end of the day, Liberty, they have talent, but if you look at their back end, if you look at their back seven, they are very, very small. And I look for SU to run right at that. I look for SU to attack that, whether it's out wide with screens or over the top with Taj Harris. I think they're really going to try to really, as Dino alluded to this week, be more physical, because if you want to say anything about last week's performance at Duke, the one theme that he's harping on is we got to match the physicality. Well, now you're going to be hearing about that all week, and you have a team and an opponent in Liberty that is not going to have the size that Duke had or a normal team in the ACC has. I think they're really going to try to send a message and really put it on Liberty with the ground game.
No matter what happens on Saturday, Trevor Lawrence, Travis Etienne, and Clemson looms next week, but we'll see what the Orange do against the Flames. That's Orange Weekly presented by Krause Health. For Nate Mink, I'm Brent Axe. We'll talk to you next time.